They laughed when the single dad pulled his pickup truck onto the shoulder of the interstate for a crying teenager. By sunrise, one phone call would change everything. But not because he was rich, not because he was powerful, because on a cold stretch of American highway, when nobody was watching, he chose kindness anyway. The laughter started at Miller's Diner just outside Topeka, Kansas. Ethan Walker sat alone in a corner booth nursing a cup of black coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes earlier. The waitress slid a folded utility bill across the table. "Looks like you've been staring at that thing all morning." Ethan managed a tired smile. "Try to convince it to get smaller." She laughed softly. He didn't. The numbers were real. Electricity, water, insurance, school supplies for his 12-year-old son, Caleb. Life had become a constant balancing act since his wife passed away 4 years earlier. Across the diner, a group of contractors joked loudly as they headed for the door. One glanced toward Ethan's worn flannel shirt and aging Ford F-150 parked outside. "Man, looks like he's carrying the whole county on his back." Another chuckled, probably still losing. Ethan heard them. He simply nodded politely when they passed. Dignity did not require a defense. A few minutes later, he paid his bill, thanked the waitress by name, and stepped into the chilly autumn air. The sky hung low and gray above the Kansas plains. His pickup truck groaned before finally starting. Like him, it had seen better years. The drive home took him along a quiet stretch of interstate lined with harvested cornfields and weather billboards. He was thinking about Caleb's upcoming school science project and whether he could afford the supplies when he noticed a figure sitting alone beyond the guardrail. At first, he almost drove past. Plenty of people did. Cars rushed by without slowing. But something about the girl's posture made his chest tighten. She couldn't have been older than 16. She sat on the cold grass, hugging her knees, tears streaking down her face. Ethan eased the pickup onto the shoulder and climbed out. "Hey," he called gently, keeping his distance. "You okay?" The girl looked up quickly, startled. Expensive clothes, designer sneakers covered in dirt, eyes swollen from crying. She looked less like a runaway and more like someone who had simply run out of answers. "I'm fine," she said. The words sounded rehearsed. Ethan glanced to the highway. Maybe, but nobody sits beside an interstate in 40-degree weather because they're having a great day. For a moment, she said nothing. The wind tugged at her blonde hair. Trucks roared past. Somewhere in the distance, a church steeple rose above a cluster of trees near a church parking lot. Finally, she whispered, "I don't know where to go." Ethan lowered himself onto the grass several feet away. Not too close. Not intimidating. Just present. Then maybe start with not being alone. The girl's eyes filled again. She looked exhausted, frightened, and far too young to carry whatever burden sat on her shoulders. Ethan reached into his truck and handed her a bottle of water from the cooler he kept for workdays. "My son gets mad if I don't stay hydrated," he said. A tiny smile appeared despite her tears. It vanished almost immediately. "You don't even know me." Ethan nodded. "You're right." He looked toward the fading sun. "But somebody's daughter is sitting on the side of a highway, and that seems like enough information for today." The girl stared at him. Something shifted behind her eyes. Not trust. Not yet. But perhaps the first small crack in fear. Then she reached in her pocket, pulled out a trembling hand, and revealed a phone with a dead battery. "There's someone I need to call," she said quietly. Ethan followed her gaze toward the dark screen. And for reasons he couldn't explain, he suddenly had the feeling that whoever answered that call might change far more than this evening. The girl stared at the dead phone in her hand as if it carried the weight of her entire world. The last rays of sunlight slipped below the horizon, painting the Kansas sky in fading shades of orange and gray. Ethan rose slowly and brushed the dust from his jeans. "There's a gas station about 5 miles back," he said. "They have charging ports near the coffee counter. We could get your phone working." The girl hesitated. Every lesson about strangers seemed to battle against the exhaustion in her eyes. Ethan understood. Trust was not something you demanded. It was something you earned. "You do not have to tell me your name," he said gently. "You do not have to explain anything tonight. But it is getting cold." For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she nodded. The drive was quiet. The heater rattled softly inside the old pickup truck while country music played low through worn speakers. The girl sat near the passenger door, clutching her backpack tightly. Ethan kept his attention on the road. When they reached the gas station, fluorescent lights buzzed above the parking lot. A few truckers stood near the pumps. Inside, the smell of coffee and fresh pizza filled the air. Ethan bought 2 hot chocolates without asking if she wanted one. When he handed hers over, she looked surprised. "Thank you. My son says hot chocolate solves 80% of life's problems." A faint smile returned. This time it stayed a little longer. As her phone charged beside the soda fountain, Ethan noticed her hands trembling. Whatever had happened was bigger than a simple argument or missed ride home. Across the convenience store, a television above the counter showed a business news channel. A female executive appeared briefly on screen during a story about a major technology company. The girl immediately looked away. Ethan noticed, but said nothing. Sometimes silence was kinder than questions. 20 minutes later, the phone finally powered on. The screen lit up with dozens of missed calls and messages. The girl's face drained of color. Her breathing quickened. "That many people looking for you?" Ethan asked carefully. She swallowed hard. "Something like that." The phone began ringing almost instantly. Unknown numbers. Then another. Then another. The girl silenced them all. Ethan frowned slightly. "The person you need to call? Is it safe?" She stared at the screen. "Yes." A long pause followed. "I just do not know if they will understand." Outside, a freight train horn echoed through the night. The sound seemed to pull her back from whatever memory held her captive. Finally, she selected a contact and pressed call. The line rang once, twice, 3 times. Then someone answered. Ethan could not hear the voice, only the girl's reaction. Relief flooded her eyes. Tears followed immediately after. "I am okay," she whispered. "I am safe." She listened for several moments before glancing toward Ethan. "No," she said into the phone. "He did not ask for anything. He just helped me." Another silence. Then she handed the phone to Ethan. "She wants to speak with you." Ethan blinked. "Who?" The girl's voice trembled. "My mother." He accepted the phone cautiously. A calm female voice came through the speaker. Educated, controlled. Yet beneath it he heard unmistakable fear, the kind only a parent could feel. "This is Catherine Sterling," the woman said. "And I believe you may have just saved the most important person in my life." Ethan looked through the gas station window toward his old pickup truck parked beneath the lights. He had never heard that name before, but something in her voice told him tonight was only the beginning of a much larger story. The voice on the phone carried the calm precision of someone accustomed to boardrooms, headlines, and difficult decisions. Yet beneath every carefully chosen word, Ethan could hear a mother trying not to fall apart. "Thank you for staying with her," Catherine Sterling said. Most people would have kept driving. Ethan glanced toward the girl, sitting quietly at a corner table near the gas station window, her hands wrapped around the paper cup of hot chocolate. "I have a son," he replied. "I hope somebody would stop for him." Silence lingered on the line for a moment. Not awkward silence. Respectful silence. "May I ask your name?" Catherine asked. "Ethan Walker." "Mr. Walker, I have people heading there now. Please do not leave until they arrive." Ethan looked at the clock above the coffee machines. Nearly 9 o'clock. Caleb would be home from basketball practice soon. "I cannot stay long," he said honestly. "My boy is waiting for me." Another pause followed. "Of course," Catherine said softly. "A father first." Something about the way she said it felt different. Not like a billionaire speaking to a stranger. Like a parent recognizing another parent. 20 minutes later, Ethan stepped outside and called his neighbor from beside the pickup truck. Mrs. Henderson had watched Caleb after school for years. Her small white house sat across from Ethan's mailbox on Oak Ridge Lane. "Tell him I am on my way," Ethan said, "and tell him not to worry." When he returned inside, the girl was staring at her phone again. This time she looked less frightened and more exhausted. "Your mother sounds worried," Ethan said. She laughed weakly. That might be the understatement of the century. It was the first real glimpse of personality he had seen from her. "You still have not told me your name." She studied him carefully. Then she extended her hand. "Emily." Ethan shook it gently. Nice to officially meet you, Emily. The simple introduction changed something between them. Not trust entirely, but the beginning of it. Outside, the wind rattled the gas station windows. Inside, the smell of fresh coffee mixed with the sound of a baseball game playing quietly on a television above the register. For a few minutes they talked, not about why she had been crying, not about where she came from. Instead, they talked about ordinary things. Favorite music, school, the old pickup truck. Ethan even showed her a picture of Caleb holding a science fair ribbon in a crowded school hallway. Emily smiled at the photo longer than he expected. Then her expression dimmed. "You are lucky," she whispered. "Why? Your son knows exactly who you are." Ethan frowned slightly, but before he could ask what she meant, headlights appeared outside. Several black SUVs rolled slowly into the parking lot. The atmosphere inside the station changed immediately. Employees glanced toward the windows. Customers stopped talking. Emily's shoulders stiffened. Fear returned to her eyes. Ethan noticed it instantly. "Those your mother's people?" She nodded. "Yes." But her voice carried no relief, only uncertainty. A tall woman in a dark coat stepped out of the lead vehicle and hurried toward the entrance. Even before the door opened, Ethan knew this was no assistant, no employee, no security chief. This was a mother. And as Emily rose from her chair, fighting tears once again, Ethan realized that whatever had driven her onto that lonely highway was far from over. The reunion about to unfold might answer one question, but it was about to reveal several more. The woman crossed the gas station parking lot with a speed that had nothing to do with status and everything to do with fear. The moment the door opened, Emily rushed forward. Catherine Sterling dropped every trace of executive composure and wrapped her daughter in a tight embrace. Neither spoke at first. They simply held on. The fluorescent lights reflected off the windows while the few remaining customers quietly looked away, granting them the privacy that grief and relief often deserve. Ethan stood near the coffee counter, giving them space. He had seen enough hospital waiting rooms after his wife's illness to recognize that some moments belonged only to family. Eventually, Catherine stepped back and cupped Emily's face with trembling hands. "I thought I lost you." Emily lowered her eyes. "I know." The words were small, but they carried the weight of months, maybe years, of pain. Catherine glanced toward Ethan. For the first time, he saw her clearly. Mid-40s, elegant without trying. Intelligent eyes shadowed by exhaustion. The kind of woman who carried responsibility the way other people carried briefcases. She approached him slowly. "Mr. Walker, Ethan is fine." Her expression softened. Then Ethan, "Thank you." 3 simple words. Yet they felt sincere. Not the polished gratitude of a public figure. The gratitude of a mother. Outside, one of the security drivers waited beside the SUVs, while a cold wind swept through the parking lot. Catherine reached into her purse. Ethan immediately raised a hand. "Please do not." She paused. "You do not even know what I was offering." "Maybe not, but I know why I stopped." And it was not for money. For a moment, she simply stared at him. People in her world were accustomed to transactions, favors, negotiations, conditions. Ethan's answer seemed to catch her off guard. Emily noticed it too. Something unspoken passed between mother and daughter. The drive home should have come next. The problem should have been solved. Yet Emily remained strangely distant. She avoided eye contact. She answered questions with single words. Finally, Catherine sighed. She ran away from a boarding school in Connecticut 3 days ago. Ethan blinked. Emily looked embarrassed. "Mom, he deserves to know," Catherine said gently. The truth emerged slowly. Not rebellion. Not recklessness. Loneliness. After her father's death several years earlier, Catherine had buried herself in building one of the country's fastest-growing technology companies. Success arrived. Awards arrived. Wealth arrived. But somewhere along the way, distance arrived too. Emily stared through the gas station window toward Ethan's old pickup truck. "Everybody knows who my mother is," she whispered. "Nobody knows who I am." The confession settled heavily over the room. Ethan thought of Caleb waiting at home, of science projects at the kitchen table, of baseball games and overdue utility bills and ordinary evenings that suddenly felt precious. Kids do not need perfect parents, he said quietly. They need present ones. Catherine lowered her gaze. No defense, no excuse, just painful honesty. For the first time all evening, she looked less like a billionaire and more like a woman carrying regret. Several minutes later, Ethan finally checked his watch. It was late. Caleb will be worried. Catherine noticed immediately. Your son. Ethan nodded. He has school tomorrow. Emily suddenly stepped forward. Wait. Both adults looked at her. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. You should have this. Ethan accepted it, confused. The page contained a sketch. A simple pencil drawing of an old pickup truck parked beside a lonely highway at sunset. In the driver's seat sat a father-shaped silhouette. Beside the guardrail sat a girl who no longer looked alone. Ethan stared at the drawing, then at Emily. You drew this? She nodded. I wanted to remember the person who stopped. Before Ethan could respond, Catherine noticed something written at the bottom of the page. Her expression changed instantly. Surprise, recognition, and perhaps the first hint of a mystery neither Ethan nor Emily yet understood. The bottom corner of the sketch contained a handwritten sentence. It was small enough that Ethan had almost missed it. Catherine had not. Her eyes fixed on the words, and for a moment the noise of the gas station seemed to disappear. You still wrote it, she whispered. Emily looked away, embarrassed, vulnerable. I always write it. Ethan glanced down. Beneath the drawing were 6 simple words. The ones who stay are home. Catherine closed her eyes briefly. The sentence clearly meant something far deeper than Ethan understood. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was revealing. Her father used to say that, Catherine finally explained. Every time he traveled for work. Every birthday. Every school play. Every time he came home. Emily swallowed hard. The hurt she had carried onto that lonely highway suddenly made more sense. She had not simply run away from school. She had been running from grief, loneliness, and the feeling that everyone remembered her mother's success while forgetting the family that had existed before it. Ethan folded the sketch carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket. Then your father sounds like he was a wise man. Emily managed a faint smile. Outside, the wind had settled. The parking lot glowed beneath tall floodlights as drivers came and went. Somewhere across town, a grocery store was closing for the night. Ordinary life continued. Yet something important had shifted between the three of them. Catherine glanced toward Ethan. Would you allow me to repay your kindness somehow? Ethan shook his head. You already have. She frowned slightly. Ow! He nodded toward Emily. Seeing her safe is enough. Most people would have said more. Ask questions. Mention opportunities. Ethan asked for nothing. That fact seemed to unsettle Catherine more than any request would have. Eventually they walked outside together. Emily paused beside the old pickup truck. Your son like science? She asked. Ethan laughed softly. Obsessed. Last month he tried turning our garage into a weather station. For the first time that night, Emily genuinely laughed. The sound surprised even her. Catherine noticed it too. A mother's eyes rarely miss moments like that. Then another discovery emerged unexpectedly. One of the security staff approached Catherine holding a tablet. Ma'am, we confirmed the location. His voice dropped lower. The social media posts started this morning. Catherine's expression hardened. What posts? Emily froze. Ethan immediately sensed trouble. The security employee hesitated before showing the screen. A photo appeared. Emily, standing near the interstate hours earlier. Someone had secretly photographed her from a passing vehicle and posted it online. Thousands of comments had already spread across multiple platforms. Speculation, rumors, assumptions. Emily's face turned pale. Oh no. Catherine immediately moved beside her daughter. Do not read them. But the damage was done. The girl had already seen enough. Ethan recognized the look. He had seen something similar in Caleb after cruel comments from classmates in a school hallway years ago. Shame grows fastest when strangers pretend they know your story. Emily, Ethan said calmly. She looked up. The people who matter already know the truth. She stared at him for several seconds, then slowly nodded. It was a small moment, yet it landed exactly where it needed to. Catherine noticed that too. More than once that evening, Ethan had reached her daughter in ways wealth, influence, and security teams never could. The realization stayed with her as they finally prepared to leave. But before Catherine stepped into the SUV, she handed Ethan a business card. "Please keep this." Ethan accepted it politely. "In case of emergency?" A faint smile crossed her face. "No, in case our story is not finished yet." As the convoy disappeared into the Kansas night, Ethan stood beside his pickup truck holding the card. He planned to place it in a drawer and forget about it. He had no idea that less than 12 hours later, a call from Catherine Sterling would force him to make a choice that could change all of their lives. By the time Ethan pulled into his driveway, the porch light was still glowing. Caleb sat on the front steps in a hooded sweatshirt, pretending not to be worried. The old pickup truck had barely stopped before the boy stood up. "You were late." Ethan smiled. "I noticed." Caleb folded his arms. "Mrs. Henderson made meatloaf." Then clearly the evening was not a total disaster. The boy tried to stay serious, but failed. They walked inside together. The small house carried familiar smells of laundry detergent, reheated dinner, and home. Nothing fancy, nothing impressive, just a place where people stayed. Later that night, after Caleb had gone to bed, Ethan placed the folded sketch from Emily on the kitchen table beside a stack of utility bills. For a long moment, he studied the drawing. The highway, the sunset, the lonely girl. Then he carefully pinned it to the refrigerator with one of Caleb's old science fair magnets. Some things deserved to be remembered. The next morning arrived with cold sunshine and a hard frost covering the grass. Ethan was loading tools into the pickup truck before heading to work when his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. He almost ignored it. Almost. Ethan Walker speaking. "Good morning." Catherine Sterling's voice was unmistakable. Calm, professional, yet warmer than the night before. Ethan leaned against the truck. "Oh, is Emily?" "Better." Relief touched her voice. She slept for the first time in days. Ethan smiled. "That is good news." A brief silence followed. Then came the real reason for the call. "Emily wants to thank you properly." Ethan shook his head, even though she could not see it. "She already did. Not according to her." Catherine exhaled softly. "There's a community center in Topeka that our company supports. They're losing funding for an after-school science program. Emily saw the photo of your son and asked if we could visit together." Ethan frowned. The request surprised him. "Why me?" "Because she trusts you." The answer came immediately. Honest. Unfiltered. That realization landed heavier than Ethan expected. At work, he spent the morning repairing equipment behind a farm supply warehouse, but the conversation stayed with him. Around noon, while eating a sandwich in his truck, he found himself staring at Catherine's business card again. Not because of who she was, because of who Emily might become if someone helped her find her footing again. That afternoon, another obstacle appeared. Caleb's middle school called. A group project presentation had gone badly. Some classmates mocked his science ideas in a crowded school hallway. By the time Ethan arrived, the boy sat alone outside the principal's office, staring at the floor. Ethan sat beside him. "Want to talk?" Caleb shrugged. "Not really." They sat quietly for several moments. Then Ethan told him about a frightened girl he had met on a highway. Not names, not details, just enough. Sometimes people act like they know your story when they only know one chapter, Ethan said. Caleb glanced up. "What happened to her?" Ethan smiled faintly, still figuring that out. On the drive home, father and son stopped at a grocery store for milk and bread. Ordinary errands. Ordinary life. Yet something felt different. The world seemed slightly larger now, more connected. That evening, a new message appeared on Ethan's phone. It was from Catherine. Attached was a photograph. Emily stood smiling beside a whiteboard covered with plans for the struggling science program. Beneath the image was a short note. She asked if you and Caleb would join us Saturday. Ethan stared at the screen. A simple invitation. Nothing more. Yet something told him that saying yes would pull all of their lives together in ways none of them could yet imagine. Saturday arrived bright and cold, with a clear Kansas sky stretching endlessly above the highway. Ethan almost declined the invitation twice before finally agreeing. Not because he was uncomfortable around wealthy people, because weekends belonged to Caleb. They always had. But when he mentioned the Science Center, The boys' eyes lit up immediately. "They have a robotics lab," Caleb said from the passenger seat of the pickup truck. "A real one." Ethan smiled and started the engine. "Then I guess we should not keep science waiting." The community center sat near downtown Topeka, beside an aging public library and a church parking lot filled with volunteers preparing a food drive. Children moved through the building, carrying project boards and backpacks. The atmosphere felt warm, hopeful, and refreshingly ordinary. Catherine was already there when they arrived. She wore jeans and a simple sweater instead of the sharp executive clothing Ethan expected. Emily stood beside her holding a clipboard. For the first time since meeting her, she looked relaxed. "You came," Emily said. "You invited us," Caleb replied. The two teenagers exchanged awkward smiles. Within minutes, they were discussing robotics, weather balloons, and science competitions with the enthusiasm only young people possess. Ethan watched from a distance. So did Catherine. "She has not looked this happy in months," Catherine admitted quietly. Ethan folded his arms. "Kids usually know what they need before adults do." Catherine laughed softly. "You always make simple things sound important." Maybe they're important. Something changed in her expression. Respect had begun replacing curiosity. Not because Ethan impressed her, because he consistently revealed priorities she had forgotten. As the afternoon progressed, volunteers discovered a serious problem. Funding cuts had left the science program without enough equipment for the next semester. Several organizers immediately began discussing sponsors, publicity campaigns, and donor lists. Catherine could have solved the issue with a single check. Everyone knew it. Yet before she spoke, Ethan noticed something else. Several older students were quietly packing supplies into boxes, preparing for disappointment, preparing to lose something they loved. Ethan walked over and asked questions. He listened more than he talked. Then he offered an unexpected idea. A network of local mechanics, electricians, farmers, and tradespeople could donate materials, tools, and practical workshops. Real-world experience, community involvement, ownership. The proposal spread quickly through the room. Volunteers embraced it immediately. What impressed Catherine was not the idea itself. It was the way Ethan included everyone. Nobody felt rescued. They felt valued. Later that afternoon, while children tested projects in a crowded classroom, Catherine found herself watching Ethan repair a broken demonstration table with borrowed tools. No cameras, no recognition, no audience, just quiet service. Emily noticed her mother's expression. "Now do you understand?" she asked. Catherine looked at her daughter. "Understand what?" Emily smiled faintly. "Why I trusted him." The words settled deeply. For the first time, Catherine realized that Ethan had earned something money could never purchase. Credibility with her daughter. Trust. Yet not everyone viewed the growing connection positively. As the event ended, one of Catherine's corporate advisors approached with concern written across his face. He handed her a tablet, displaying a series of articles spreading online. The headlines were already circulating. Speculation about Emily's disappearance. Questions about Catherine's parenting. And now photographs of Ethan and Caleb standing beside them at the community center. Catherine's expression darkened immediately. Ethan noticed. So did Emily. The day had begun healing old wounds. But as the advisor quietly explained what the media was preparing to publish next, all four of them realized a far more difficult challenge was approaching. The trouble arrived faster than anyone expected. By Monday morning, photographs from the community center had spread across local news sites and social media feeds. Most of the stories focused on Catherine Sterling and her daughter. Some questioned her parenting. Others speculated about Emily's disappearance. A few went further, inventing stories that had never happened. Unfortunately, Ethan and Caleb had been pulled into the storm. Ethan first noticed it when he stopped at Miller's Diner before work. Conversations quieted as he walked through the door. A television above the counter displayed a photo of him standing beside Catherine outside the Science Center. The headline beneath it was misleading enough to be damaging. Someone at a nearby booth whispered. Someone else laughed softly. Ethan ordered coffee, thanked the waitress by name, and sat alone. He did not defend himself. He did not complain. Yet the humiliation settled heavily in the room. Quiet dignity often carries a cost. Back outside, he found several reporters waiting near his pickup truck. Questions came quickly. Assumptions came faster. Ethan answered none of them. He simply climbed into the truck and drove away. At work, the situation worsened. A customer made a joke about billionaires and publicity stunts. Another suggested Ethan was chasing attention. Ethan kept repairing equipment, kept working, kept choosing restraint. But by lunchtime, the exhaustion showed. That afternoon, an even harder blow arrived. Caleb called from school. His voice sounded smaller than usual. "Dad, can you come get me?" Ethan immediately left. He found his son sitting on a bench outside the principal's office. A group of students had repeated rumors they saw online. Nothing cruel enough for punishment, just enough to wound. Caleb stared at the floor. "They think we're trying to get famous." Ethan sat beside him in the empty school hallway. For several moments, neither spoke. Finally, Ethan said, "People will tell themselves stories. We cannot control that." Caleb looked up. "Then what can we control?" Ethan placed a hand on his shoulder. "Who we are when it happens." The answer sounded strong. The reality felt much harder. That evening, another challenge emerged. A letter arrived in the mailbox. One of Ethan's side contracts had been canceled. The company did not want unwanted media attention. The loss meant less income. Another bill. Another sacrifice. Inside the kitchen, utility bills sat stacked beside the refrigerator where Emily's sketch still hung beneath the science fair magnet. Ethan stared at it for a long time. For the first time since helping her on the highway, doubt crept in. Not regret. Never regret. Just fatigue. Meanwhile, Catherine faced her own crisis. Corporate advisors urged her to distance herself from the situation. Public relations teams recommended silence. Investors worried about headlines. Yet every solution seemed to require abandoning the very people who had helped her daughter heal. Late that night, she called Ethan. He almost did not answer. When he finally did, neither spoke immediately. The silence felt heavier than any conversation they had shared before. "I am sorry," Catherine said quietly. Ethan looked at the sketch on his refrigerator. "You do not owe me an apology." "Maybe not, but you are paying a price because of us." Ethan considered her words. Then he glanced toward Caleb's bedroom, where a faint light still glowed beneath the door. Doing the right thing does not stop being right because it gets difficult. Catherine closed her eyes on the other end of the line. The statement landed deeply. Yet neither of them knew how much more difficult things were about to become. Because while Ethan was choosing dignity and Catherine was choosing responsibility, a decision was being made elsewhere that could take away the one thing they had worked hardest to protect. The decision being made elsewhere came from Catherine's board of directors. By sunrise, several executives had recommended a simple solution. Separate the company from the controversy. Distance Catherine from the headlines. Quietly end public involvement with the community science program. On paper, it sounded practical. In reality, it would send a devastating message to every student who had finally begun to believe in that program again. Catherine sat alone in her office overlooking downtown Kansas City, staring at the recommendation. For years, she had been praised for making hard decisions. Yet this one felt different. Because for the first time, success and integrity were standing on opposite sides of the room. Then her eyes landed on a photograph Emily had left on her desk. It showed Ethan repairing the broken demonstration table while children worked around him. No cameras, no speeches, no recognition, just service. Quiet, steady service. Across town, Ethan was doing what he always did. He was helping Caleb prepare for a regional science showcase at the community center. The contract he had lost still hurt. Bills still waited on the kitchen counter. The old pickup truck still needed repairs. Life had not suddenly become easier. Yet he continued showing up. That afternoon, while setting up display tables, Ethan discovered another problem. The science program's cancellation announcement had already leaked. Students were packing projects into boxes. Volunteers looked defeated. Emily stood near the entrance, fighting tears. "They are shutting it down," she whispered. Ethan looked around the room. Young people who had spent weeks building experiments and dreams suddenly looked as though they had been told none of it mattered. He could have walked away. Nobody would have blamed him. Instead, He climbed onto the small presentation platform and spoke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just honestly. Programs matter, he said, but people matter more. What makes this place special is not funding. It is not buildings. It is not headlines. It is every person in this room willing to help somebody learn. The room grew quiet. Do not let someone else's decision convince you that your effort was wasted. Knowledge stays. Character stays. What you build in each other stays. Even the adults stopped moving. Emily listened from the front row. So did Caleb. And without Ethan realizing it, another person was listening as well. Catherine had arrived moments earlier and was standing unnoticed near the back door. She heard every word. For the first time, she fully understood what Emily had seen on that highway. Ethan did not inspire people because he had power. He inspired them because he gave people dignity. By evening, Catherine made her choice. The next morning, she stood before reporters, board members, employees, students, and community leaders gathered outside the center near the church parking lot. Cameras waited. Questions waited. Silence waited. Catherine stepped forward. Several weeks ago, my daughter met a man on the side of a Kansas highway. The crowd became still. He did not know who she was. He did not know who I was. He simply saw a young person in pain and chose kindness. She paused. Since then, many stories have been written, most of them wrong. She then revealed the truth. Emily had left because she felt forgotten. The headlines had harmed innocent people, and the science program would not be closing. Instead, Catherine announced a long-term foundation partnership built around the exact community model Ethan had suggested. Local tradespeople, mentors, teachers, students. Sustainable support earned through participation, not charity. Applause erupted, but the most important moment came afterward. Catherine walked directly to Ethan in front of everyone. "You never asked me for anything," she said. Her voice carried through the crowd. "Yet you gave my daughter something I almost lost. Hope." Ethan looked uncomfortable with the attention. As usual, Catherine smiled through tears. "You reminded me that success means very little if the people we love feel alone." Nearby, Emily hugged Caleb. Students celebrated. Volunteers cheered. The tension that had shadowed all of them finally began to lift. Weeks later, life looked surprisingly familiar. The pickup truck still sat in Ethan's driveway. Utility bills still arrived in the mailbox. Caleb still filled the garage with science projects. But some things had changed. Emily visited often. Catherine volunteered at the center regularly. Not because she needed good publicity, because she wanted a second chance to be present. One quiet evening, Ethan stood on his porch watching the sunset while Caleb and Emily laughed in the yard. Catherine joined him holding 2 cups of coffee. Neither spoke for a moment. The silence felt peaceful, earned. Finally, she looked toward the children and smiled. "The ones who stay are home." Ethan recognized the words immediately. The words from Emily's sketch. The words from her father. The words that had quietly connected all of them from the beginning. He nodded. "Yes," he said softly. "They are." And as the last light faded across the Kansas sky, no headlines mattered. No fortuna mattered. What remained was something far rarer. Dignity, respect, healing, and the quiet strength of a man who stopped on a lonely highway because kindness was simply who he was.